Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're tackling one of the most frustrating, confusing, and honestly, wonderful parts of the English language: idioms. We're pulling a lesson straight from Speak English Like an American to show you exactly how to permanently lock these tricky phrases into your brain. The goal? Sounding just like a native speaker.
So you might be wondering, what exactly is the secret here? What is the real trick to sounding less awkward and fully understanding native speakers when they talk? Because let's face it, you can sometimes understand every single word a person says, but have absolutely no clue what they actually mean.
Well, the answer from our source material is pretty clear. Fluency relies on your mastery of those tricky idioms and phrases that are just everywhere in conversational English. You literally have to master them. But here's the catch. Because they don't make literal sense, standard rote memorization usually falls flat. You can't just stare at a vocabulary list and expect your brain to hold on to it.
To fix this, let's step into a story. We'll call this section Bob's Bad News, focusing on the idioms from Lesson 2.
Just listen to how this flows in a real conversation. Susan asks, "What's the matter?" And Bob replies, "I got canned today. I was Peter's right-hand man, and he stabbed me in the back." Now, read naturally, it sounds totally normal. But stop and think about the literal meaning for a second. Bob didn't actually get shoved into a metal tin can. He wasn't a walking disembodied hand, and his boss didn't physically attack him with a knife.
The conversation goes on. Susan tells him to keep your chin up. Bob shoots back, "When pigs fly. Besides, I told him off." We're hearing these incredibly dense idioms just clustered together. Susan is just saying, stay positive, right? But Bob is convinced getting his job back is about as likely as a flying pig, especially since he just scolded his boss. So Susan, ever the optimist, simply tells him to look on the bright side.
"Hang in there," she says, but Bob is in full panic mode now. "In the meantime, we'll have to live from hand to mouth," he cries. "We'll make ends meet," Susan reassures him. See how the metaphors just keep building? Bob is terrified about barely having enough money to survive, while Susan is just trying to calm him down and say they'll manage.
Finally, Bob says, "If worst comes to worst, a tent is our last resort." Susan encourages him to think big, but Bob, totally frustrated, just mutters, "Easier said than done." I mean, wow, that is a massive amount of weird, metaphorical language packed into one incredibly short conversation.
So here's the absolutely crucial question. How do we get all these bizarre, colorful phrases to stick permanently in your memory without you having to painfully stare at a flashcard 100 times?
We are going to use the memory palace technique. It's a method popularized by memory expert Tony Buzan, and it involves using physical, spatial locations to remember items by linking them with highly associative, extremely exaggerated mental images. It's all about the rule of absurdity. The more ridiculous, insane, and frankly absurd the mental picture is, the stronger your brain retains it.
Let's put this into practice and mentally build the down-and-out living room.
I want you to actually close your eyes for a second. Walk with me and map out this spatial path in your mind. We're going to start at the front door, step onto the rug, look over at the sofa, and then turn to the coffee table. Let's start populating this room.
Okay, you walk up to your front door. To remember the phrase "get canned," vividly picture Bob struggling to squeeze his way out of a giant silver tin can that is literally blocking your doorway. It's huge, it's metallic, and yep, he got canned.
Next, you step inside and look down at the rug. Right there on your rug is a giant, detached, fleshy human right hand, just lying there. And Bob's boss, Peter, is angrily stomping on it over and over again. Why? To cement the phrase right-hand man into your memory. Bob was his right-hand man, and now it's being crushed on your floor.
Moving past the rug, you look over at your sofa. Sticking right out of the upholstery on the back is a giant, comical, cartoon-style knife. Bob is standing right next to it, frantically pointing it at it, shouting that Peter stabbed him in the back. The betrayal has literally manifested in your living room. Now, resting right there on your coffee table is a giant, oversized, fleshy chin. And it has these tiny little muscular arms, and it's physically trying to lift itself up off the table like it's doing push-ups. Susan is standing right next to it, cheering it on, yelling, "Keep your chin up." It's a completely bizarre image, but it perfectly anchors the idea of staying positive.
All right, let's continue the journey and step right into the kitchen tour.
Over the next few stops of our mental walkthrough, we're going to pan our eyes upward to the ceiling, then over to a small kitchen TV, the window curtains, the kitchen table, the fridge, and finally the bookshelf. Remember, spatial memory is incredibly powerful, so keep following this path with me.
Look straight up at the kitchen ceiling. Suddenly, a whole flock of flying pink pigs is soaring right across the room over your head. They're oinking, flapping their little wings, completely mocking Bob's chances of ever getting his job back. It's the perfect anchor for the phrase meaning never going to happen when pigs fly.
Now look over in the corner. The kitchen TV isn't playing a show. Instead, it's shining this blindingly bright, burning yellow sun. Susan points right at it, telling Bob to look on the bright side. And right next to the TV, literally swinging from your curtain rod like a wild monkey, is a person just hanging there. You yell up at them to hang in there.
Resting right on the kitchen table is a pretty grotesque but unforgettable sight. There's an absurdly giant hand holding a giant, disembodied mouth, desperately shoving handfuls of food directly into it. This visceral image perfectly illustrates the harsh reality of living from hand to mouth.
Turning your attention to the refrigerator, I want you to picture two giant, thick, frayed ends of a massive rope. They are desperately stretching across the fridge doors, straining and pulling to tie themselves into a knot, literally trying to make ends meet.
Finally, sitting on the kitchen bookshelf is a massive, heavy book titled How to Be Rich. You reach out your hand to read it, but the book violently snaps shut on your fingers like a bear trap. It's a painful reminder that taking that advice is definitely easier said than done.
Master your memory. By walking through these surreal, ridiculous rooms, you've completely bypassed rote memorization. You've embedded these tricky phrases right into your visual cortex.
So, now that you possess the actual secrets of fluency, my question for you is this. What bizarre, crazy room will you construct next to conquer the rest of the English language? The tools are right there in your mind. Grab your book, pick your room, and let your imagination run absolutely wild. Thanks for exploring this with me today.